Friends, welcome back. This is the Bankrupt Hippo YouTube channel. I'm Bryce, and if you're looking for an episode of Coffee and Kernels, well, you've come to the right place. This is episode 28, where we talk all about the world of movies, video games, TV shows, and the like. For this week, we're going to have a lighter one, and first of all, I guess I should start off by saying Happy New Year to all of you who are listening out there. Can't believe 2021 has already come and gone. I think 2021 was a lot faster than 2020. And I guess I shouldn't be too surprised given the state of the world and everything's going on. But anyways, we got a really great show for you all today. Just double checking my show notes to make sure I'm covering all the topics that we're going to talk about. That is right. This is episode 28. Like I said earlier, we're going to dive into some weekly recap and what I've done within the past week and some other awesome games and movies that I've been able to see. We're also going to talk about the weekend box office and what it bodes for this particular New Year's weekend. It's going to be more so the updates as of this morning. That's Sunday morning, Sunday the 2nd of January, because obviously Sunday's not over yet. I shoot these episodes on Sundays, but what I've learned about box office numbers is the fact that they're pretty darn accurate when they're predicting the rest of Sunday. So don't expect too much to change between today and tomorrow. Then we're also going to talk about my random thought of the week. My random thought of the week is a bit of a longer one, so I decided not to include any other additional topics for this week. And then, of course, we'll finish off with our weekly recommendations. Let's just kind of jump right in. So for the weekly recap, I had the pleasure of playing a lot of video games and watching a lot of movies this week. I'll start off with the movies that I ended up getting to watch. I watched two phenomenal movies that were on my radar to get through. The first of which was Jojo Rabbit from director Taika Waititi. Jojo Rabbit was everything I thought it would be and more. I think the one thing that I had going into Jojo Rabbit was a sort of naivete. And that naivete was towards the overall plot line. I knew it was about a boy growing up in Nazi Germany. That's all I really knew. And I don't even really think I knew that it was directed by Taika Waititi originally. And the one thing that I've grown to appreciate with Taika Waititi's work is the fact that he always adds a comedic spin on things, even in the most unlikely of places. And to me, Jojo Rabbit was this perfect blend of adding comedy to this harrowing life that this boy is living in Nazi Germany. It was just such a weird juxtaposition that made the movie work so well. And it's full of satire, it's full of fun, and I deeply, deeply enjoyed it. And every actor and actress in the movie acted their butt off, and it was phenomenal to watch. Taika Waititi is in it, of course. He acts and directs in a lot of the movies he is involved in, which mad props. I heard that is a very difficult proposition to get through. You got Scarlett Johansson, you got Thomasin McKenzie, you've got Sam Rockwell, Archie Allen. And I actually had to Google this when I was watching Jojo Rabbit, but I recognized Archie Allen from somewhere, and it was driving me absolutely nuts. It turns out he also plays the son of the crime boss in the first John Wick movie. I forgot what his name was in the movie, but Archie Allen is in John Wick as well, so I thought that was a really funny callback. It was driving me crazy. I couldn't help it. I had to go Google it. But if you guys are interested in my full and extended thoughts on Jojo Rabbit, or my full review, I should say, I reviewed it. I gave an off-the-couch reaction for it. It's on the channel if you're interested in that sort of thing. If you guys aren't interested in watching it, I'll just tell you this. The movie is phenomenal. Do yourself a favor and watch it. It came out in 2019. It won quite a few awards, if I'm not mistaken, including, I believe, a Critics' Choice for Best Movie of the Year, and rightfully so, because the movie is just, it's brilliant in many, many ways between its satire, comedy, and story. It does a great job of telling a really intense story with a lighter tone interweaved into it. I've never seen a historical story told in that particular manner, and I thought Taika Waititi crushed it. So if you're looking for a good movie, looking for something different, that is a good go-to to watch. The next movie that I watched this week was Baby Driver from Edgar Wright. I have grown to be a huge fan of Edgar Wright. The most recent film of his that I watched was Last Night in Soho, which was in theaters. Of course, I reviewed and gave an out-of-theater reaction for that, if you're interested in that. And long story short, Last Night in Soho was a great movie. It was so much fun to watch. He crossed multiple genres. I've never seen a director able to do that. The same can be said here with Baby Driver. Baby Driver was just an excellent film overall. It's about this kid. He was played by Ansel Elgort. Ansel Elgort, I have trouble saying his name for whatever reason, but he's this kid who gets caught in a really bad situation with a crime boss. He's got to be this getaway driver, and he's really, really good at it. He can drive like a banshee. He's really into music. He's just a really unique and interesting guy, and I'll leave it kind of vague, so if you guys haven't seen it yet, you can go ahead and watch it. But Baby Driver, it's basically a heist movie combined with a love story. It takes very two typical narratives, turns it on its head, and makes it something unique and interesting. And it uses a lot of different techniques. It uses a lot of different little things that all just amalgamate to this awesome movie watching experience. And I have to say, the one thing that I was nervous about in going in and watching Baby Driver was the fact that it's clearly about this kid who's really good at driving, but I was worried that the movie wasn't going to give us enough of Baby actually driving, and it turns out it gave us that in a pretty good amount. There's quite a few driving sequences, and each of these driving sequences is orchestrated to, dare I say, near perfection. I mean, you watch some of these stunt drivings happen, and you're just in shock and awe, and you wonder, how can they pull off those moves? And you'll be going on YouTube for hours after watching it just to see how they not only filmed the stunt driving, but how they actually pulled off the stunts that they did, because some of the stuff they do, wow, it's incredible. And it really helps sell this idea that Baby is in fact not only a driver, but a damn good one too. So it's a lot of fun. There's a lot to appreciate there. There's a few great performances in the movie. Not all of them are particularly excellent, but you've got Jamie Foxx, who I thought was the standout. You've got Ansel Elgort, who is good. John Hamm, Kevin Spacey, Lily James, I'll even go as far as to say. And they're all pretty much main characters in the movie, and they all give great performances, so that elevates the movie a little bit. But one thing that I really enjoy that Edgar Wright seems to do consistently is he uses his filming prowess, his filming techniques, in order to really invite you as an audience member into each scene and actually allow you to kind of deduce what each character is thinking or feeling, and based on your deduction, predicting where those characters are going to go next with it. And I thought it was brilliant. I'll explain that in a little bit greater detail so you can really understand what I'm saying. There's nothing worse in a movie than when it tells you everything rather than showing you everything. I think by a movie is showing you things, it allows you the space to draw your own conclusions about what's going on. I've talked about this probably on previous Coffee and Kernels podcast episodes. I've probably talked about it in quite a few of my reviews that I've done, but Edgar Wright, again, does that here in order to provide you the best experience possible, because if a movie just tells you what's going on, it doesn't really leave you any wiggle room in order to, one, get involved, and two, it kind of force feeds you into this idea that the movie has to be a certain way. But by leaving you the room to go ahead and watch each of these things and be shown just small, subtle objects, colors, moments of eye contact between characters, it allows you to go ahead and just try to develop an understanding of what's happening. And to me, this movie epitomizes that to a T. And it really enhanced my experience, because me as an audience member, I could go in, I could watch it, and I could deduce what exactly is going on in the scene. And it just made me feel smarter than maybe I actually am. And when a movie gets you to feel that way, it adds to the stakes, it adds to your experience, because it invites you in and it allows you to draw your own conclusions. So that's one of the many reasons why I thought Baby Driver was quite excellent. There's obviously many more. I could talk about it all day. Maybe I will talk about it all day for a podcast episode, but for now, I'll just leave it at that. Full review is on the channel, and so is my Off the Couch review as well. Now, I talked about in the previous episode that I had traded for a PS4. In fact, my controller is right here, if you guys can see that. Yep, a PS4 controller. I have been on the market for a PS4 for a while. Never really got a good opportunity to go ahead and grab one. I talked about it last week. I'll leave it at that. But since then, I managed to go ahead and buy 4 games on the PlayStation Store because they had a ginormous sale. It was half off a ton of games that I wanted. So I went ahead and I bought The Last of Us Remastered, which I haven't had a chance to start yet. It'll probably be a while before I can. I've played it before. One of the best games I've ever played in my life. And I also bought Jak and Daxter 1, 2, and 3. And I finished Jak and Daxter: The Precursor Legacy, which is the first one, all the way through. I finished it in like, 3-4 nights maybe. I just pounded through the game. It was so much fun. It was just as fun as I remember it being, albeit a little shorter than I remember it being, which I'll talk about in my random thought of the week pretty soon here. But yeah, it was a great nod back of nostalgia to my childhood, and the reason why I fell in love with games was because of the Jak and Daxter series. It's my favorite trilogy to this day, my favorite series of games to this day, and it's been unwavering. It's been so much fun. And the starkness of being able to play the first Jak and Daxter and the second one back to back. I'm currently on the second one right now. I'm a few hours into it, but the creative changes they made between 1 and 2 were so vast, and I could tell how different they were when I was younger, but now that I'm older, I have a much fuller appreciation for it because I can obviously understand a lot more things. They almost made it a completely different game, and I've never seen a game studio, or really a movie studio for that matter, totally reinvent itself between games and make it so much better. It's amazing. The only other gaming franchise that I can think of recently that has attempted a change fundamentally to their franchise and in that great of a scope was the Resident Evil franchise, which I'll talk about in a second. But I think the Jak and Daxter series did it better than the Resident Evil franchise did. And I'm a huge fan of the Resident Evil franchise after their change, but it's just been a ton of fun. It's been a pleasure getting to go ahead and replay those games again, and I'm glad I got the PS4, but it's just been a ton of fun. Jak 3 is obviously going to be on the radar too eventually. I'm curious to see what I'll think about it, and I'm curious to see what I'll think about the trilogy as a whole when I'm done and finished playing. Maybe I'll make a video about it. Maybe I won't. The one thing I'm still trying to figure out how to do is capture game clips and screenshots from my PS4 and get them sent to my phone. The one really nice thing about Xbox, and this has been one of the small things that I've noticed between the differences between the consoles, is Xbox does, in my opinion, a much better job in getting you to network with your fellow gamers and also being able to capture game footage and extract it to anywhere you want. Like, I can get footage from my Xbox into my phone if I need to. That is pretty impressive, and it's pretty seamless too. It's a little slow, but it works, and that's really all you need. You just need it to work. PlayStation, I found that when I tried to extract footage from Jak and Daxter: The Precursor Legacy, I just couldn't do it. My options were you can send it through a message to your friends, which is good for the networking piece that I mentioned earlier. You can share it on Twitter, which isn't too bad either. I just don't have much of a use for that. And the other was, I can't remember what the third option was, but I just remember it not being very useful for me. So that's just one of the small things I've noticed between the differences between the PlayStation and the Xbox in terms of consoles. Maybe I'll make a full video on that someday too. I feel like I have so many ideas that get incepted but just kind of get shit canned because there's just so many videos. Like if I acted upon every idea I had for a video, I would do nothing but make videos all day. So I have to kind of pick and choose as to whatever I want to do, which is one of the hard things I've discovered in being I hate using this term, content creator. Oh, it just makes me vomit saying it out loud. I guess I just prefer a normal guy who likes to share his experience with other people. I guess you could say it just, man, content creator makes me want to vomit. But that's one of the harsh things that I've discovered is you could make a video for every idea that you've had, but you'd just be making videos all day. I mean, hell, with all the videos that I make with movie reviews, streaming videos, the podcast, and just other general videos, that it does take up a good chunk of time. But as you get practice, as you get more well-versed, the time that it takes to complete these things speeds up and whatnot. So take that for what it's worth. My rant is over. But anyways, I think that the one point I wanted to touch upon with the whole Jak and Daxter trilogy is the games are much shorter than I remember them being. Now, I may have become desensitized to game times in general because from when I was younger and playing the Jak and Daxter series, I was probably even younger than 10 years old at that point. I can't remember quite, but until now, game times have increased drastically. I mean, the average amount of time from what I was reading and researching online for the Jak and Daxter games, it was about 10 hours to complete in its entirety, not, of course, being a completionist. But for games today, it would take you like 40 hours and maybe 30, 40 hours to complete. For example, Far Cry 6 took me like 50. It took me a really long time to just get through the story of Far Cry 6. The point is, games are much longer today than they were previously. So it got me thinking a little bit, and it served as my inspiration for Random Thought of the Week, which I'll touch upon in a second. I'll give you a little tease for it. Are games better having shorter run times or longer run times? Keep that in the back of your mind as we go through the rest of the episode, and we'll touch upon that pretty soon here. But anyways, what else did I play this week? Because those aren't the only games I've been able to play this week. I also played Resident Evil 8 or Resident Evil Village, and I'm like this close to finishing it. The game has been quite good. I would go as far as to say I could totally see as to why people would pick Resident Evil 8 as their game of the year, because it's a lot of fun. It's very vast. It's really scary, actually, too. The one thing that really made me, I guess, nervous for the Resident Evil games is the fact that I enjoy horror games. I'm a bit of a scaredy cat, but I enjoy them nonetheless. But Resident Evil Village really embodies that, and it makes every environment that you walk around in really disturbing and really gross, and really adds to the horror element of it. It's fascinating to me how they were able to capture that with all the environments that you kind of go through. So I give the game mad props for doing that. It's really, really impressive. And I'm actually kind of holding off on finishing it because I can tell I'm like on the last little bit of it. I'm holding off on finishing it because I want to make sure that I finish it at a time in which I can actually fully write my review, film it, and share it with you all. So the review for that is going to be coming out soon. But this close to finishing it, I've really enjoyed my experience. Another thing that I really enjoy about it is the amount of weapons that it allows you is quite interesting. It's something that I actually touched upon in my Resident Evil 3 remake review, is that the weapons that they give you in that game were pretty fun. And it almost made it to, and when you combine that with the amount of ammo they give you, it almost turns into an action game. And it's funny, with the reinvention of the Resident Evil franchise and in Resident Evil 8, I still feel that way. I still feel that as though they give you plenty of ammo. For full disclosure, I'm playing on standard difficulty. And the amount of weapons that they give you, the weapons are fun to use, and the amount of the ammo they give you is quite in abundance. But for whatever reason, I don't feel that it feels more like an action game. I feel as though that Resident Evil 8 is true survival horror. The reason being, I think, is because although I'm given a ton of ammo in Resident Evil 8, I use it all. I go through all of it in abundance because there's just so many enemies that you have to combat. And with the vast amount of enemies and how strong they are that you have to combat, that kind of evens everything out. And it goes back to moving my meter toward the survival horror elements of the game. So I think Resident Evil 8 strikes a really interesting balance in that regard, and I think it really enhances its DNA in doing so and harks back to its DNA in doing so, making it a really successful, and not only that, but a fun game. So it does a lot of things right. It does very few things wrong. I'm still trying to decipher some of the elements that I think are not so great about the game, but whenever I write my full review, you guys will hear all about it. So I think that's about everything that I did for the week. The one other thing I want to mention before we get into the weekend box office is Resident Evil 8 in my contender for Game of the Year for 2021. I'm going to say probably not. I would give my favorite game of 2021 that came out in 2021 to Psychonauts 2. Having said that, I didn't make a video or I didn't make a list of my favorite games that came out in 2021 because the reality is I didn't get through a lot of games in 2021. I have mainly been playing games that have come out in years past. So, and with games, with making content around games, it's a little bit harder because games are obviously much longer experiences, like I was just mentioning earlier. And you can only play so many in a year. I have much better luck watching a ton of movies because you watch a 2-hour plus or minus, give or take, experience, and then you can go ahead and review it and you can get through it. But the time it takes me to review one game is probably time I could have spent on like 30 or 40 movies. So just doing the math in that, it's like it's a lot easier for me to make movie reviews and movie lists than it is for video games. But that's the reason why I haven't made a top 10 list, and that's the reason why I have a hesitance to say that Resident Evil 8 is my favorite game of 2021. I think Psychonauts 2 is better than Resident Evil 8 as of right now. Still haven't quite finished Resident Evil 8 yet, so take that for what it's worth. But it actually brings me to give a shout, I suppose. If you guys are interested as to what my favorite movies of 2021 were, I made a full video on that on the channel. If you guys want to check that out, I'll link it in the description below, or even put it into perhaps a card up top so you guys can see it, and if you feel the need to check it out. So I appreciate you all. I love you all. Thank you for sticking with me. Okay, so as a little nugget to that, I will say that there's a couple of animated films in my top 10 for this year. So a little teaser for the video if you're curious on checking it out. Now, that brings me into the biggest topic of the week that I look forward to is the weekend box office. This, one little disclaimer, this is going to be the weekend of New Year's weekend, so specifically December 31st through January 2nd. That's today, the day I'm recording. And these numbers that I'm going to give you in these placements are going to be as of earlier this morning. So that's Sunday morning. The reason why I've decided to start doing that, even though the weekend isn't fully completed yet, rather than talking about the previous week's results, is the fact that I've discovered, and in my research, it's been suggested to me that weekend box office numbers don't really change all that much on Sunday for whatever reason, or rather the predictions that come out for how the weekend will end up shaping up in terms of numbers are pretty spot on. So for those reasons, I'm okay with taking the results as of sometime Sunday morning and discussing them with you all here, because on Monday, I end up releasing a video of what the final numbers are in a short that you guys might have seen on my channel too. So take that for what it's worth. But anyways, without further ado, these are the box office results for the weekend. Coming in the first spot, of course, shocker, is Spider-Man No Way Home for the third weekend in a row, and it'll probably be that way for, honestly, a while. I don't see any movie for several months, believe it or not, dethroning Spider-Man No Way Home for the top box office spot for several reasons. Because one, I just don't think that any of the movies coming out have quite the hype, the fan base, or the speculation around it that No Way Home did. And I think Spider-Man No Way Home is going to have legs in keeping it in that top spot. Spider-Man No Way Home, as of this morning, made $52.7 million. It has now reached over $600 million domestically in the US. Specifically, I believe it was $611 million. And that now brings it into the top 10 highest grossing film of all time domestically in terms of lifetime numbers. Specifically, it is now in 10th. Let me just pull up my results from Box Office Mojo. It's now just eclipsed the top 10. It eclipsed Incredibles 2, which has made $608 million domestically. And currently, Spider-Man No Way Home is just about $9 million behind Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi, which grossed $620 million of all time. If you guys are curious to see what the remaining top 10 top grossing movies of all time are domestically, they include at 8 the Avengers movie, which came out $623 million. That came out in 2012. 7 Jurassic World, which came out in 2015. I believe that's with Chris Pratt. That made $652 domestic gross. Number 6 was Titanic with Leo DiCaprio, a classic, $659 million domestic, came out in 1997. Avengers Infinity War in 5th, $678.8 million, came out in 2018. Black Panther in 4th, which actually really surprised me that Black Panther made as much money as it did. It was an incredible movie. I loved it. I just was a little surprised to see it make $700 million domestic gross in its time. And then at 3rd was Avatar, $760 million lifetime gross, came out in 2009. And then Avengers Endgame in 2nd for lifetime gross, domestically, $858 million, came out in 2019. And then number 1 spot, Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens, is the highest grossing domestic movie of all time. So that rounds out the top 10. Spider-Man No Way Home is now in the top 10. If I had to guess, I think the most interesting question that I can pose to you all in the context of Spider-Man No Way Home, rather than how long is it going to stay in the top 5 for, that's irrelevant. I'm curious as to what it's going to do in terms of lifetime gross by the time everything's all said and done. If I had to guess, considering that it's continuing to make $50-60 million a weekend, I have no doubt in my mind it's going to pass I think it has the potential to be in the top 5 for lifetime gross by the time it loses its legs and stops making a ton of money. Right now, as of when I'm recording this, 611 million lifetime gross. The only the amount of money separating it between it and the 5th spot, which is Avengers: Infinity War, is only $60 million, $67 million, give or take. It could make that in the next 2 weeks, I think, pretty easily, especially with no other movies coming out that really have a ton of people's interest. The only other movies that I can think of coming out in January that are, at least, of course, all film is subjective, but that are on my most anticipated list are the 355, Morbius, and also Scream. And those movies aren't coming out for 2-3 weeks at a time. I don't think Scream is going to take away much from the box office. I don't think the 355 will. I think Morbius is the biggest threat to it, but I don't even think any of those have a chance to dethrone No Way Home from the top box office spot. So take that for what it's worth. By the time everything's all said and done, I think No Way Home is going to be a top 5 lifetime gross domestic movie of all time, and it will pass Infinity War. If I had to put a final number on it, well, lifetime movies could hypothetically go on forever. I think it's going to be just below 700 million, so I don't think it will quite overtake Black Panther, but it's got a chance. We'll see. And then that brings me to the second spot of the week in terms of box office results, which is Sing 2, which had a very small drop from the previous week. It's made, as of this morning, $19.6 million this weekend, and its drop was only by about 18 million. It made 23.75 million. Last weekend, it's 23.75 million. So I'm impressed that Sing 2 has actually stuck around and made as much money weekend to weekend as it has. It's to the point where I'm kind of wondering if I should go and see it, because it's very rare to see a movie have that small of a drop between its first and its second week. This is only Sing 2's second week. And the fact that it's managed to have the legs to stay in that second spot behind No Way Home and still make a decent amount of money, I think is impressive, especially over the holidays. So maybe I should check it out. 18% is insanely of a small drop. I don't know why that is, why it only drops so low. Maybe it's just that good of a movie and you need to go see it. So I don't see any other movie dethroning Sing 2 from the second spot, honestly, coming out in the next few weeks. Maybe 355 will prove me wrong, but we'll have to see in that regard. And then the other results, which aren't really too interesting if I'm being honest. In third, The King's Man actually jumped up a spot to third. It's made 4.5 million as of this morning. Same as the case with American Underdog. It jumped up another spot from 5th to 4th. American Underdog, 4.075 million as of this morning. And then, of course, we have Matrix Resurrections, which just took the biggest dump on this list by far. It jumped from the 3rd spot to the 5th spot. It's only made 3.8 million this weekend. And it's a huge drop. That's about a 75% drop from its opening weekend, which, for those of you who might not be in tune with that kind of thing, that's a pretty big drop. And I think that the word of mouth for the Matrix Resurrections has just gotten around, and I think it's caused its box office to just kind of drop. And plus, when you couple that with the fact that it's on HBO Max for streaming, that kills repeat viewings. And now you have a 75% drop. If the movie was incredible, stellar, I think it probably would have had a much smaller drop, but take that for what you will. And after this weekend, I would imagine that The Matrix Resurrections probably won't be in the top 5. I think with the premiere of the 355 will probably be in that spot somewhere. If I had to call it now, I'm guessing that for next weekend's box office results, No Way Home is going to keep the top spot. Sing 2 is going to keep the second spot. I think the 355 will debut at the 3rd spot. And then I think that the King's Man American Underdog will round off the top 5, but they won't stick around much longer than that. So, friends, I want to know what you, as I slap my mic, I want to know what you think of the box office results from the weekend. Where do you think No Way Home is going to end up in terms of lifetime gross domestically? Do you think Sing 2 can keep its legs and continue to make money? Whatever you think, you know where the comment section is. Let me know. Okay, so that brings us into the latter part of the episode, which is going to be kicked off by my random thought of the week. Obnoxiously long bathroom break for a second there. Thanks for sticking with me. So My random thought of the week. I had this inspiration for my random thought of the week by playing Jak and Daxter, like I mentioned earlier. The thought I had was, what makes a better runtime for games? Is it a 10-hour runtime? Is it a 40-hour runtime? Is it somewhere in between? What makes for a better experience, shorter or longer games? And for me, the one thing I discovered is the fact that we've become, or at least I have become, desensitized to really long game times. When I was younger, even up until I would say I was in high school, when I was a huge fan, I still am a huge fan of the Gears of War franchise. Games were typically anywhere between like 8 and 12 hours long in order to get through the story or the campaign, as it's now been adopted as the wider term for the story. But I was always sort of, that was the norm. That was the normal thing. You would be able to play through a game sometimes in one night. I knew friends who would literally buy games on Black Friday, finish it that day, which to me is just insane. I'm more of a slow burn kind of guy. I like to play through my games, take my time, and really get fully immersed and indulged in the experience. So for me, I guess the one conclusion I like to draw is the fact that if you've got a game that's 10 hours long, and when you're a younger person, you might not be able to buy games all the time. You have this tendency to get really intimately familiar with the games and learn as much about them, because that's like your game. You pick one game that you can buy because you don't have a ton of money, and you just play through that game, and you play through it like crazy, and you play through it constantly. And there's pros and cons to either side of the coin, the 10 hours or the 40 hours. On one hand, with 40 hours, obviously, it takes you a lot longer to complete, and that exactly is not great for people who don't have a ton of time on their hands. On the other hand, if you are more of into the 10-hour experience, there's a lot to be said for that too, because one, you can get through the game a lot quicker, you can get a full experience a lot quicker. If you don't have a ton of time, that becomes a lot more doable to complete a 10-hour game rather than a 40-hour game, because you'll probably, if you don't have a ton of time and you pick up a 40-hour game, could probably take you a good 3, 4, 5 months to get through just the one game, which you could argue that's good value for your money. But if you're looking to have as many experiences as possible and many diverse experiences as possible, it's not exactly ideal. So for me, it's a bit of a balancing act when I try to get through a lot of these games. Is where do I fall, really? Would I rather buy a game that's 40, 50, 60 hours? Would I rather buy a game that's 10 hours? And after a ton of debate with myself, I think I would rather prefer the 10-hour game experience. Now, to provide a little bit more context around it, I am obviously an adult. I can buy as many games as I would like or can afford, and it's no problem. So that's where I'm coming from in this space. I think I would answer this question differently if I had my own family, if I was younger and maybe didn't have an income, or if I had different circumstances. The reality is the answer to this question is going to differ depending on who you are and what your situation is. For me, in my situation, I would prefer the 10-hour method. Here's the reasons being. With a 10-hour experience, you can get through a lot more games in a reasonable amount of time. For example, the Jak and Daxter series. If it only takes me 10 hours to complete Jak 1, 2, and 3, by the time I finish all 3 of them and complete them in their entirety, that still is 20 hours less to get through 3 experiences than it did for me to get through one mediocre Far Cry 6 experience. And that's another thing too, is if I'm playing Jak 1, 2, and 3, maybe if it's not those 3 games, maybe if it's other shorter games, and my experience is poor with those games, or at least mediocre, or at least I only spent 10 hours playing that game. With Far Cry 6, I spent like 50, 60 hours into the game. I just checked my runtime not too long ago, and it was a very mediocre experience. That 60 hours could have been spent on a much better, much shorter experience with the Jak and Daxter series, and I could have played through all 3 of those and no problem. So I think that there's a lot less at stake by playing shorter games in general. By playing shorter games, are you probably going to be spending more money because you get through them quicker and then you got to go buy another experience to get through? Yes, probably. You're probably getting less bang for your buck, but I think that the quality the quality potential that you get by playing shorter games is much greater of a proposition than by putting all of your eggs in one basket for just one game. Plus, if you're like me and you find a good sale, you get even more bang for your buck because I bought all 4 of those games that I talked about earlier. That's Jax 1, 2, and 3, and also The Last of Us Remastered, all for like $30. I paid $60 for Far Cry 6. Of course, Far Cry 6, a much longer experience, 60 hours. These 4 games, probably more so like 40 or 50. I could see why people would maybe prefer a 60-hour Far Cry 6 experience more so than a 10-hour Jak and Daxter experience. Reason being is if I was a younger kid and I maybe I didn't have an income and I couldn't buy as nearly as many games, I think I would probably prefer the whole 60-hour Far Cry experience. The reason being is because you get the most bang for your buck that way. You buy one game and you get endless entertainment and updates and online fun with it. So you could, not only does it take you like 60 hours to get through the story, that takes up a lot of time, but there's other online potential that you can play with friends as well. So there is something to be said for really long games like that. I would even throw the Assassin's Creed franchise into that vein. For example, when I actually ended up putting down and never finishing Assassin's Creed Odyssey that came out a couple years ago. The reason being is because I had spent like 40 hours up to that point, up to when I stopped playing it, into playing the game. I was like, all right, I'm going to finish it. I'm going to get through it. I'll do whatever it takes. Well, I got through my 40 hours and that felt long. And then I was hearing on different podcasts and whatnot, oh yeah, to complete just baseline Assassin's Creed Odyssey, it's like 100 hours. And I'm like, there is no way in hell I'm spending another 60 hours on trying to get through Assassin's Creed Odyssey. It was just too big. It was too much. I would much rather spend that 100 hours having as many experiences as possible than putting all my eggs in one basket into just one for a game that by the time the story wraps up, I might not even like. So the value proposition was different for me. But for a young kid, 100 hours for buying one game, that can keep you occupied for a long time. And if you like to strategically plan out, maybe you can buy 2-3 games a year. That actually would make a lot more sense because maybe you could buy between Far Cry 6, between Assassin's Creed, Valhalla, or Odyssey, or whatever you might play, and one other long game, you only got to buy 3 games and you're occupied for the whole year. I would argue that maybe with the introduction of Xbox Game Pass, you could use the money that you used on those 3 games, provided they're brand new, full price, and use it to Xbox Game Pass where you get a constant library year round whenever you want. And you can have a ton of experiences on that. But that is a whole nother bag of tricks because Xbox Game Pass is the freaking bomb. Now, on the flip side of the coin, what would my answer to this question be if I was maybe a person? Like, what if I was a parent? What if I had children? What if I had a whole family to keep me occupied? I'd probably opt for, again, the 10-hour experience games rather than the 60, the 40, the 50-hour experience games because families take up a lot of time. My parents, I know, raised myself and my 2 brothers, and that took up a lot of their time. And when you don't have a ton of time to play games, you might want to go for more experiences and as much of them as you can. With only 10-hour experiences, you could actually probably get through one of those games in a reasonable amount of time, maybe a month or 2, and it won't totally just take and kill all of your time. So I think if I was coming from that perspective, I could see why the 10-hour experience might be a little bit more appealing. So different versions, different contexts provide different answers overall. So to explore that, I decided to bring in an additional perspective and a surprise guest. Bringing in McGuire to add in some additional perspective to the question of whether or not a 10-hour game is better than a 40-hour, or which experience do you prefer? So, McGuire, I ask you the question now. Which would you prefer, a 10-hour game or a 40-hour game? Feel free to give as much or as little context as you want. I know you mentioned you like multiplayer games, so your answer might be different. Do you have a family? Do you have kids or anything like that I don't know about?
Mm-hmm. Well, so yes, I am a multiplayer player, as we were talking about before this. I prefer 10-hour length of like a story mode game just because I'm not much of a story mode player. Like if I get a COD, I don't really play the story. I go right into multiplayer, or and or the Battle Royale or whatever they're on to now. Like Fortnite never bought the campaign or anything.
I don't think I don't think anybody ever has. I haven't either.
Yeah, so I'm definitely a 10-hour just because I like the multiplayer experience more. I play with a lot of people online. Like the games I play, like Rust, they don't have a campaign. I usually play that online.
Oh yeah, that's another good point too that I didn't think about is that some games in general just don't have story modes. They don't have campaigns, and that's like another layer to this question I didn't even think about. Is for all of you who play multiplayer out there, there's almost no need for a campaign story at all. So it's like the shorter the campaign, the better, because then you can just jump into multiplayer, I guess, guilt free. It would be a way you wouldn't feel like you're missing anything. Like so, like for example, you said
Rust.
Rust.
Yeah,
Sorry, why did I?
It's more PC, but they brought it to console a little bit. It's not the best on console.
So yeah, I was gonna say a lot of games that are optimized for PC are not very great on console. That's interesting though with the multiplayer perspective, because like for me, I despise multiplayer. Like I would actually prefer, and I'd still want 10 hours, but I guess for different reasons. Because yeah, I despise multiplayer because of the fact that it could take you such a long time. Like for example, or even with like online, like open world games, like the example I gave earlier was Assassin's Creed Odyssey. That game takes 100 hours plus to get through, and I just despise that because it's like, oh my god, I could never finish 100-hour games, and I have no kids or really, family besides that. So it's like, it's just really interesting to hear different stuff about that. So
yeah, the one thing though about multiplayer is the amount of time you got to put in, and you can't really get to the end of it.
Yeah, there's no end to multiplayer. The
good thing with campaign is there's an end. Like you could say you get to the top level, but then there's still, you could keep going. Or if it was like 2K a couple of years ago, a handful of people got to the top like rank because you just needed time. And I spent 40 days on the game.
Wow,
40
days.
I wasn't even close.
Oh my!
One of the tops. So yeah. So some multiplayer, it's endless. Like I think that's a bad thing about it. Like I've been playing RuneScape for like 10 years.
Yeah.
Not at a max out account yet.
Yeah. So
that's the one thing with campaign is there's an end, and I know achievement hunters out there like a campaign for the achievements. I know I used to do that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I guess it would all depend on what kind of game experience you're into, because like you said, if you're more into like the social side of it where you have like a massive multiplayer online, like I have a coworker who has been playing, I forgot what game it was, but he's been playing, like you said, RuneScape for like 13 years, and it's just one of those things that never really ends. But the good part about having a 10-hour campaign is that it's like a book. You get to the end of it, and that's just kind of it. You can move on to something else, and it doesn't occupy your thoughts till the end of time.
Yeah, and if you can get a new game every week, you just buy the 10-hour campaign, get it over with, onto the next game. Or good thing is if you got Game Pass, you have unlimited amount of campaigns you could play.
And I'm glad you mentioned actually Game Pass, because that's another point I brought up earlier was if you had bought, say, 3 games on the year that were like 60 hours each, the money because you figure like what, $60 a game?
Yeah.
Usually, especially if it's a longer one these days, the money that you could have spent, or the money that you did spend on buying those 3 games, could have been spent on a year's worth of Game Pass, and you probably would have saved money, and you have an access to a whole bunch of games that you can get through, and the library of it really never ends because they're always adding stuff to it.
Yeah, it almost seems like it's getting to the point where buying the physical game is already pretty much out of date, unless you're a collector of the physical games. Like I see some gamers are, like a streamer I watch before Miskiff collects the old boxes and
he does,
and he grades them and whatnot, but yeah, if I think just Game Pass, and I know they got like the EA Pass and all this stuff is kind of just overpowering, like buying the actual like game, even the digital game.
Yeah,
it's kind of overpowering it unless you get that good of a deal and you want the game forever. Other than I know people who just like to go from game to game, complete stories. Rather get the Game Pass just to finish the game, and then you don't need it anymore.
Right, yeah, it's like then that way you don't have to store it, you don't have to, if you buy the digital copy of it, there's really no resale there, but yeah, it's like once you're done, you can just offload it from your console and you're pretty much done and you're good to go.
Yeah.
And that's funny. I actually bought a physical disc for like the first time in a long time the other day. It was Resident Evil 8. I think the steelbook's actually right over there too. So
yeah, I mean, the good thing with some of them is the collector's edition, and I know those are good physical things to get. Like some games, you can buy them like the $100 collector's edition, and you can get like a whole box and come with collectibles or whatnot. That's probably the only time I'd buy a physical game now.
Yeah, like with Far Cry 6, you can get like the replica of, I forgot what the gun was, but it's like a huge replica gun, and I'm like, oh my god. Or like with Gears of War, you can buy a replica Lancer, which I almost bought at one point, but I'm like, no, there's no reason I need it.
Yeah. Like, I know if they want to sell physical copies, there's got to be something that comes with it. Like, when I played Borderlands back in the day, I had my Borderlands 2 poster that I loved.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
like, that's like another, I guess, incentive for the physical game.
Yeah, for sure. So for those of you who are into physical media, now might be the time to buy it, because someday I think it will go obsolete, but that's a whole nother conversation for another time. So there's an additional perspective. Thanks, Mugar. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I would be really curious to hear your thoughts on this question. What do you prefer? Do you prefer games with a story that have a short experience or a longer experience? Whatever you guys think, you know where the comment section is. Let me know. Okay, so now to round off this episode, we're going to get into the weekly recommendations. For this week, same rules as always. I'll give you a movie, I'll give you a TV show. I will also give you a video game to recommend. Normally, since I'm not a huge TV fan, I am not going to give you a TV show again this week because there have just been none that have floated to my radar. I watched almost no TV for this week. So, with that, the movie I'll recommend to you is Jojo Rabbit. If I had to pick the better of the two between Baby Driver and Jojo Rabbit, I think I enjoyed Jojo Rabbit a little bit more. It's actually caters to kind of a wide audience. It's not too adult to the point where it's like crazy violent, but it's a very endearing, heartfelt story in a world, and it takes place in a world that isn't so great. I'm doing a terrible job of explaining it, but watch Jojo Rabbit. It's phenomenal. You won't regret it. And then for my video game recommendation for the week, I actually have to double check and see. I'm going to go with Jak and Daxter: The Precursor Legacy. After revisiting it again, probably after a decade plus, maybe a little bit less, the game is still as fun, still as heartfelt, still as concise, maybe a little less concise than I remember it being. So with that, Jak and Daxter: The Precursor Legacy. And plus, I believe it's on sale at the PlayStation Store for a few more days. Might be half off, so check it out if you're interested. That's my recommendation to you. Friends, what game, video game, TV show, movies would you recommend to your fellow friends out there? Whatever they are, drop them down in the comment section. I'd be curious to know because I'm always looking for new stuff too. And friends, with that, that brings us to the end of Coffee and Kernels episode 28. Thank you so much again for joining me. If you like this, click right here if you'd like to see more. Happy New Year. I've been Bryce, and until next time, have a great day.